Welcome back to the Village Bonfire for another episode of the Wild Sacred Journey podcast. A podcast not just for your mind, but for your body and spirit too. Here we don't just talk theory. Instead, we compassionately engage with our lived experiences and a wide variety of topics together, all to invite the question, in these times we find ourselves in, how do we be more human? Thank you for being here. May these conversations awaken, inspire, repair, and evolve something deep within each of us and serve the wild, tender aliveness of our personal and collective hearts. So welcome back to another episode of Wild Sacred Journey podcast. And I am your host, Kate Powell, a medicine woman, ceremonialist, story weaver, and a soul revival guide. And here around this particular fire in this particular podcast, host of conversations around these questions of in soul starving or times that feel like there's a lot of dehumanizing forces. How do we be more human? How do we find that compassion? How do we root into heart and body and soul and world and ourselves and each other? So I'll get started by lighting our candle, our village fire. And so as I do that today, I'm feeling just this real sense of coalescing around it, this real sense of sort of drawing energies from where they might be scattered around, kind of back to center, and this sense of really gathering and coming together. And so I invite you, as you're listening, wherever you are, to just take a few deep breaths in and out. And just let yourself just draw the threads of your awareness back from people, places, or things that are not right here and right now with you. Let yourself feel the gift of your own intactness, your own wholeness. And let yourself settle into your back body a little bit, into a place of receiving, a place of arriving. And from there, we enter into today's conversation. And yes, so today is a conversation. I haven't had a conversation in a while with somebody else. It's been fun to kind of explore, just sharing some of my own thoughts a little bit more. And then also it's been, as I've been traveling and settling, it's been trickier navigating the logistics. So anyway, I'm really excited to have with me today Tad Hargraves, and online you might know him as Marketing for Hippies. So I first connected with some of what Tad's about and with sort of his ethical marketing work through Instagram. And then I met him. I actually got to meet him in person in Edinburgh back in October during the Scottish International Storytelling Festival. And we got to enjoy a few evenings of conversation around story and culture and ancestry and all kinds of fun things that I love to nerd out about. So so I'm just really excited to have him here and just sort of see where this conversation takes us. So welcome, Tad.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So I'll read you his bio. For over a decade, Tad has found himself drawn to conversations about how we might tend to the harm that's done in communities in ways that leave the community stronger and more whole at the end, not more shattered. Between September 2004 and February 2006, Tad dedicated himself to learning his ancestral language, Scottish Gaelic, in both Nova Scotia and Scotland. He can speak Gaelic with conversational fluency, so that's really cool. And he also runs a blog called Healing from Whiteness, as well as a Facebook group of the same name. He's a co-founder of the Nova Scotia Gaels Jam and co-starred in Canada's second Gaelic language film, The Fiddler's Reel. He currently lives in Duncan, British Columbia, although he hails from Edmonton, Alberta, traditionally known in the local Indigenous language of the Cree as, you might have to pronounce this for me. Okay, beautiful. So that's Beaver Hill House. And his ancestors come primarily from Scotland, with some of the Ukraine as well. And he's drawn to conversations around politics, history, ancestry, healing, and how those all intersect. So yeah, and I'm sure we'll get into more of some of what he's done professionally as well. But yeah, or maybe not. Who knows? We meet soul to soul here. So sometimes those conversations get really roll to roll, right? And yeah, aren't always the most human. So um, but yeah, so with that said, I guess Tad, I'd like to invite you. You know, I usually start each conversation with inviting people like, how would you introduce yourself? How would you maybe either want to weave yourself into the social fabric of things for people or speak to any forces that shaped you? Um, and yeah.
Well, I suppose, like most people, I'd rather never introduce myself. I'd always rather be introduced. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I've got a business marketing for hippies.com, and I was in Brighton doing a workshop. I was hosted by these folks who run a business called the Happy Startup. And I invited this fellow Carlos and his friend Lawrence, who started the Happy Startup. As my host, I say, well, do you want to come up and say a few words about a Happy Startup? And the response was, oh, fuck. This is
Uh-huh.
how I often feel, at least in modern times. I think introducing ourselves can, how can it help but feel like it has some pitch in it,
Yeah.
trying
Yeah.
to convince others of my merit. And, I suppose it wasn't always the way that for our ancestors, if I were to introduce myself um, in Gaelic and it was in a formal way, it would be, Smishatad, Andik Mahinsham Van Lagale, Doch, Anson, Duikei, Smishatad, Maclar, and the Alistair, Joseph, Kiana, Kandrakai, Kiana, Kanazakon, the Gushin Duikai Duakon, the Kai Ruikanez Ruikane, Kanez Duikanez, the Wolakai, Konwolakai, Shanyaki Konwolakana Kanez. So that's saying, well, my name's Tad. My ancestors come from the Highlands of Scotland, from the High Country. And then what you heard was a series of names. And so, of course, we all have multiple strands, but that was one strand of my ancestry. And every time you heard ik in that, that was meant son of. So, and you heard ik a lot of times. So that's my mother's father's father line back to 1100.
Mm.
So, and I think that would be a way where people would introduce themselves primarily, here's who my people are.
Mm-hmm.
And the modern times, it's just so much emphasis on who are you? Who's
Mm-hmm.
this fruit from the tree, but with no reference to the tree? And I think this
Mm-hmm.
would just be unthinkable to our old timers. So, yeah, I mean, and then also, I'm so aware that most of the forces that have shaped me have probably escaped my attention.
Mm.
I'm probably unaware of
Mm.
most of them. Other people may be more aware of the
Mm-hmm.
forces that have shaped me than I am. And some of the forces that shape me, it really may not come into my awareness until later. I
Mm-hmm.
think many of us have had that where God, that's a long fucking answer. But
Go
we've,
for it.
we've had that experience
it's
of,
it's way too open a question for it to not be a long ass answer. So go for it.
well, it's just that we've probably had the experience of not realizing how significant an event was until way
Yeah.
later. And
Yeah.
you look back and you think, oh my God, that shaped my whole life.
Yeah. Mm.
And I haven't had my whole life yet, so I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But, I would say some things to locate me. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta, went to Waldorf school up until grade 6 and then public school. And in terms of the cultural work, certainly being a part of the Orphan Wisdom School with Stephen Jenkinson uh,
Mm-hmm.
is the most significant piece of
Mm.
that.
Mm.
But also, my time in Scotland, the storyteller George McPherson, who I got to
Mm.
spend time with. And at the Gaelic College and all that learning about ancestry and folklore, there's so many threads, but those are a few, anyways.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm really struck by, that being able to even name by name people going back to the 1100s, in the lineage, and how few people, particularly, I think, in North America, but really in a lot of places around the world. And particularly, it also seems like in um, folks of European ancestry, where a lot of that lineage has been knowledge of the lineage seems to have been lost. I think there are some cultures in the world where those practices are still more intact.
Yeah. Or if
Yeah.
if you were kidnapped from your family as a child, or you were taken
Mm-hmm.
from your continent and put somewhere else,
Mm-hmm.
or the machinations of the more powerful, and you just don't even know where you came from. So one of the things it tells you is that I can do that is that the Mackays were more well off as a clan, which meant they had records. A lot of the other clans didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some sign of affluence in all of that, and yeah, for most people they wouldn't, I think, be able to do it. So that's telling and revealing in a certain way. But I'll say here's the thing that's more telling is even those who could still do what I did have no interest in it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of people who could go back that far, maybe even farther,
Mm-hmm.
and probably in more directions.
Mm-hmm.
And it's there, it's available. I mean, you could just go to ancestry.com and it's there, and you could find it. But it's not done because there's no point. Why would you need to memorize all the names anyways? They're just there. If you want
Mm-hmm.
to ask me my 13th grandfather, okay, well, I'll just look it up and tell you. So that says a lot about where we are societally. The move away from oral tradition
Yeah.
into it's just all here.
Yeah.
I'll memorize
Your
anything.
phones. Yeah. Yeah, when I was in Ireland, I actually got to meet a third cousin of my mom's. The third cousin once removed of me, who we just discovered. Who, yeah, his great grandfather was brother to my great great grandfather, and the two branches of the family tree haven't met up in 100 and whatever years, and so we
Yeah.
got to meet, which was pretty incredible. So here's the benefit of like the internet actually in like helping us foster that connection where a rupture had happened, a repair was actually able to then happen. But it's fascinating too. I mean, I really lucked into meeting him because he has a personal passion in the family lore and the ancestry, and he's tracked it both through lore and through genetic testing and DNA. But he's the one who's really working to preserve all of that. And he's been doing it not just for our little branch of the O'Byrnes, but then he's also been intrigued by the Burns and O'Byrnes all through Ireland and has kind of been tracking that family name. And which is, yeah, fascinating. But it seems like where there are pockets of that still remaining, it's in part due to people whose personal passion it is to keep that alive, rather than a larger cultural valuing of that or reverence for that or um, devotion to that or whatever we kind of want to call it.
Well, and it's the same with I'm sure, any part of folklore.
Mm,
The folk tales, the songs, the dances, the craft, textiles, embroidery, pottery, all that. It's usually very few people. I mean, Grimm's, the Brothers Grimm, they
mm-hmm,
go out collecting all these stories in Germany.
mm-hmm,
Had they not done it, we might not have almost any of those stories. I mean, who knows how many stories would have survived? But most countries have these. In Italy, you've got Calvino, who gathered up a bunch of these stories, and um, Norway, Sweden, you've got Anderson and Moe, I think,
mm-hmm,
on and on. Just Campbell in
mm-hmm,
Scotland. So, yeah, some people have preserved it with us in mind, is the amazing thing.
Mm.
In the same way that our ancestors preserved the stories and passed them on because they knew there was something in these stories for us.
Mm.
My guess is within the last few hundred years, there was a lot that had been forgotten about the stories. People didn't know what they meant entirely anymore. They just knew what they meant. They knew that they meant something. You know, there's this fantastic book I haven't delved into in depth, but it's called The Star Tales of Mother Goose.
Mm.
So here's a little rhyme that everybody knows. Okay, so see if you can finish it.
Mm.
So, hey diddle diddle,
The Cat and the Fiddle.
cow jumped over the moon.
The little, oh gosh, something for the spoon.
A
The
little
little,
dog
yeah, the little dog
laughed.
laughed. That's
See
right.
such a sport, and the
The
dish
dish ran away with the spoon. There it
dish
is.
ran away with the spoon. So, but that is this.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. So for those listening, yeah, he's holding up a picture of the different constellations. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the
Mm.
fiddle is the constellation Lyra. The spoon, that's Ursa Major, the Big Dipper.
Mm-hmm.
The cow, well, that's Taurus. And the moon is
Mm.
starring as the moon. Canis Minor. Canis Minor is the little dog. And the Milky Way is the dish. And the Leo is the cat.
Mm.
So, you know, that little nursery rhyme and Little
Mm.
Bo has lost her sheep. Of course, that's constellations too.
Mm.
So all of these nursery rhymes we grew up with actually contain astronomical information. And so as a child, you might just learn those nursery rhymes. But then coming initiation time, all those old nursery rhymes suddenly come back. And now they're unfurled. And now you understand which constellation they relate to. And now you're learning the deeper stories. And in fact, probably a lot of the other stories that you learned had astronomical information in them as well. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the Pleiades,
Mm-hmm.
Orion, uh,
Mm-hmm.
some of the significant ones would have been in these old stories, the Seven Sisters, you know, the Pleiades.
Mm-hmm.
You know, many cultures have stories of the seven brothers or seven sisters, which is a
Mm-hmm.
very clear reference to the Pleiades. So
Mm-hmm.
these things were passed on, but in order to pass them on, in order to preserve them, they had to change the stories
Mm-hmm.
because the stories were pagan. You know, the stories were not Christian. The stories didn't fit in the church's understanding of the world. And so you had to take some of those older, more elemental forces and turn them into demons or devils. So one example of this is the Grimm story, The Devil and the Three Golden Hairs, which you can read in any Grimm's book. And that story has this young woodcutter going to hell to get three golden hairs from the devil's head. But a story which you could make the case as an older version, partly because it's much more complete and robust, but for other reasons you'll see, is the story of Plavacek and what is it called? I can't remember the name, but it's the Foundling. It's about him going to visit grandfather Know-All.
Mm.
So who is great-grandfather Know-It-All? Well, he's the son. And so then you realize that the golden hairs are the rays of sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in hell, it's in the Grimm's version, when he goes, there's the devil's wife. And the devil's wife, you know, like fee fi fo fum and all this, she hides him from the giant, who actually was originally the son
Mm.
that got turned into the devil in that particular version. And she hides him, but in the Czech version, it's not the devil's wife, it's the devil's mother. And when he comes home, he flies in through the west window, and he's an old man. But in the morning, when the sun leaves, he's an infant. He goes out through the east window.
Mm-hmm.
But when he comes back as an old man, when he goes to sleep, he lays his head on his mother's lap and falls asleep. And of course, then the Freudians would have a field day with this.
Of course.
Oh my gosh, he's on his mother's lap. This is a little too intimate. This is clearly an Oedipal complex. He's just can't get over his mother. And where's the father? Well, he must have killed him, obviously, so that he could have his mother. And then she wants that too. And it's a kind of emotional incest. That's what this becomes.
Right.
But what's actually happening is every morning, the earth, who is the mother of the sun, gives birth to the sun, and that's him crowning over the horizon.
Mm.
Then at midday, he's at full strength. So he's a man, full grown. And then at sunset, he's an old man.
Mm-hmm.
And the sunset is him laying his head on his mother's lap.
Mm-hmm.
But you see how it changes then. Suddenly it's no longer the sun. It becomes a giant, then becomes the devil.
Mm-hmm.
Or vice versa, whichever way the story needs to change to keep the story alive in the face of persecution. Because of course, as soon as colonizers come in, it's the old traditions have to go. There's no more. I was at a gathering. This woman, Stephanie Mackay, who you have to interview at some point, Fianna.ca. She runs a mythology club. But she's one of the most extraordinary myth workers I've ever come across in my life. And she was leading a 2-day thing, and we got to talking about how under the regulations of BC Health, technically, if you're hosting a gathering of some kind, all the food has to be, food safe. It has to be, so it basically means you have to buy it from a store. You're not allowed to cook it yourself. You're not allowed to, if you want insurance and all this, it's got to, so that's insane.
Right.
Can't have a barbecue, can't do a potluck, can't just cook food together from scratch.
Right, which is old as time, like how humans have gathered, old as time. Yeah.
And so then what do humans do in the face of this? Well, we just get better at hiding. Yeah, in Hawaii, this happened when the white man came, and the name, as I understand it, one of the names that was given to the white man was Haole. And what it meant was they don't give breath. When the Hawaiians meet, it's just nose to nose, and they share a breath with each other, and the white man wouldn't do it. And so, but there was a period where they, of course, initially, I imagine, had high hopes for some level of humanity on the other side, but were met with anything but that. And so then there was a big gathering, and the traditions were declared tapu. It's a secret. Everything gets hidden now. And so then you might be talking to the elder who's in charge of all these ceremonies, and you say, are there any of the old ceremonies happening? He said, I don't think so. I think they used to, but not since my grandfather's time, and we just lie right to your face to protect the tradition. And this is what happened with the stories, is the stories had to undergo various changes in order to keep these important messages. But if you can imagine it like this, there's an old house that gets built, one of these old timber frames, as you probably noticed in Europe, the buildings are older than our countries combined. And those buildings have lasted so long because their construction was so good. This timber frame, trees that were grown properly and not rushed, and the timber was treated well. So you could, if you wanted to, take off the walls, take off the roof, strip the thing down, and build back up around those beams successfully. And I'd submit that's what happened with the old stories. The bones typically don't get messed with. I think until you get to modern times, and then there's this arrogance of, feminism comes in and says, well, we're just going to change everything about the old stories because this is just the story of another passive female being rescued by an active male, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
as if that's all there is to see, as if there's nothing else, and as if that's even there, which in many
Mm-hmm.
cases that's not. That's the modern
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
superimposition on the thing. That these stories are so deeply ennobling of the feminine in the world in a
Mm-hmm.
way that modern feminism couldn't even touch. The deep reverence for the sacred feminine in these stories, was so there. And so I think the old storytellers knew there were certain things you could change. You
Mm-hmm.
could certainly move the furniture around.
Yeah.
No problem with that. You could even maybe paint the walls. You might even take down a wall.
Mm-hmm.
But the framing of it, you don't touch at all. And
Mm-hmm.
some stories you don't touch anything. But other
Mm-hmm.
stories we know that okay, they seem to persist and they travel, Sleeping Beauty, my God, that's everywhere around the
Yeah.
world. So many
Yeah.
different versions. And you'd look at it and from the outside you say these are not the same house
Mm-hmm.
at all. There's no way. But you strip it down to the bones and it is. And somehow the revolution against empire was fought by grandmothers
Mm-hmm.
at the bedsides of children,
Mm-hmm.
passing on this traditional knowledge in a way that would ensure it lasted and was passed on so that when there came a time where there was a generation of people who were finally ready to explore them again, there would be something to explore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you get somebody, like Stephanie, who really I just admire endlessly, can look at one of these old stories and begin to follow the thread of, like, for example, in the story, we just did The Frog Princess, which is a Russian story. And there's, maybe let me just grab it. Oh, here it is. It's right
Yeah.
here. Okay. So, if you're listening, you can't see it, but you see there's a picture of this. He's a king. There's a
Mm-hmm.
stake, and there's something dangling like a little tattered flag from this post. But the poem underneath it, of course, it's in Russian and translated, says, there was a king, he had a court, meaning like a courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
There was a king, he had a court. On the court, a stake. On the stake, a skin. Let's once more begin. So now, if I just read that poem to you, you just have no idea what it's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a little fragment of the story. But then if you saw the picture, okay, you get a bit more. But now if you look at this picture, what's on the ground there? What do you see on the ground?
There's roosters.
Yeah, but underneath the roosters.
Oh, is that a log?
Yeah, but then on the ground around the king's feet and around the roosters and the log is.
It looks white. Is that supposed to be snow? It's hard to.
Right, that's what I thought. So from a black and white picture, it's very clear that that's snow.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the color picture, it's actually brown and that's dirt.
Ah.
Yeah. And so this is what happens with traditional cultures is we get left with this poem, not even knowing there was a picture. And then you find a picture, but it's a black and white version.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make the wrong get, but then you see the color picture. And of course, that color picture is a part of a story. And that story probably itself has gone through many changes. But if you can find the oldest version of the story, you can. And probably look at a few other cultures' versions of that story, you start to put together a bigger picture and you realize, oh my God, this story was a ritual. This story was the description of an ancient seasonal ritual.
Mm.
And that ancient seasonal ritual was held in a culture that had this whole world, And so that little poem, there was a king, he had a court, on the court a stake, on the stake a skin, let's once more begin, is a tiny little doorway into the magnificence of our own European indigenous ancestral cultures.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Yeah. So as you've been speaking, I'm tracking a lot of threads here, and I love all the stories that you just shared, the little snippets of them and things. I'm finding myself like really sitting with this question of, I'm aware that it feels like there's a whole language to kind of being with these stories that we've lost in some ways, and that, it's like we have to relearn the language of stories to be able to kind of get them, because you're right, it's like there's some way that our modern languages and our modern cultures and our modern ways of being with them, it's like we see them and we see each character as an individual rather than perhaps as different forces at play or as different aspects of a single psyche, or all the different ways that they're more archetypal and symbolic, and that there's the hidden layers of meaning sort of happen in these spaces between the literal story. I mean, much like in our life, like so much of what's happening happens between the literal, physical, material world and something that's more subtle and abstract and kind of, yeah, subtle, abstract, something else, mysterious, numinous, whatever we want to call it. So, and that there's this meeting point of those things, and that happens in these rich stories as well, that there's this meeting point of the literal story and then sort of this other layer, and there's like this language or this way we have forgotten in many cases that we almost have to re-find again to be able to actually even start to find our way through these stories. And so it's interesting because that kind of got me curious about, as these stories were shifting, either because the church was retelling them and kind of trying to find ways to slide their messaging in the folk stories, or because people were shifting them in order for them to survive, like you said, the bones to survive, in these changing times. But like, where along the way then, if too much time passes and the people don't flesh the stories back out again, where along the way do we then even lose the ability to do that and start to mistake the stories that are there now as for the old stories, or what comes first, kind of the shifting of the story, allowing our brains to sort of lose some of the old ways, or our brains losing the old ways and then forgetting the stories, or some combination of both. I don't know. That's sort of where my brain is at right now.
Well, I mean, you could make it worse, and also more accurate at the same time, which is, it's not just, we've gotten these anemic versions, but then they become toxic versions. We get the Disney version of these stories, and everything's a happy ending, and it so much gets lost in those versions, and of course then the stories become seconded to the purposes of empire, and that's not a story anymore. It becomes propaganda. It's making a point. And I would make the distinction that spells have stories have their origins in the land. They come from, or the sky, but they come from the world. Is where these stories come from. But spells don't have their origins in any land at all. They have their origins in power. And power is only begun once you've begun to domesticate the land. This isn't me denigrating domestication at all. There are beautiful ways to enter into these covenants of domestication with the land. But that opens the door. And then if those agreements, if those covenants, if that marriage between humans and the holy and the land, that's not kept up, this is the beginning of the accumulation of power, because now we're not feeding anymore, we're just taking. Once you take, you got more. And now you have surplus. And with that surplus, you can do a lot of damage to yourself and to others. So we end up with these toxic mimics. And thank God, here's part of what I think has allowed this to happen. So to give a real life story of how this goes. So Martin Prechtel, who I know you're aware of, he, now how does it go? He's got kinship with the Kewah people in New Mexico. I think his mother's Iroquois, I can't remember, and his father's European. I may not have that exactly right. But he's raised in the Pueblos in New Mexico, but he's also raised hearing European folktales.
Mm.
that are read by his father. And he loves them, like kids love folk tales, but nothing in particular. You forget them because, it's just a story, and then you get older and you see the Disney version. It's like, that's for
Mm-hmm.
children.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes to Guatemala, where he becomes adopted by the medicine person, his fellow Chevalier, in the village of the Mayan tribe in Licatitlan, in Guatemala. And he ends up, Martin becomes the apprentice to this man, eventually takes on his job as medicine person, and plus becomes kind of one of the chiefs, joins the hierarchy of the tribe until the US military comes in and it's terrible, and they want to kill all the traditional people. So there's that story all over again.
Mm-hmm.
And then you find it doesn't matter if it's a left-wing or a right-wing government, they'll
Mm-hmm.
slaughter the indigenous people for different reasons. He escapes to the United States and, traumatized, is just eking out a living, gets discovered by Robert Bly. And Robert Bly brings him to his men's conferences, which sounded like they were quite the feral affairs. And when he left, Chevalier said, "You have to keep the seeds alive." And he meant that literally, as in there's some of these corn seeds, keep them alive, but also he meant the cultural seeds.
Yeah.
And Martin had no idea what that meant. But the riddle of that was entrusted to him. So when he was back in the States, he was picking up some of these old books and reading some of these old folktales. And to his complete astonishment, he found the same things in European folktales as were in the Mayan folktales.
Mm.
All the deep layers of meaning, the substrate of the timber frame, it was all still there. And he just couldn't believe it. And so he started this school, Bolad's Kitchen, I think in large part to help Europeans rediscover their indigenous soul.
Mm.
But helping them kind of clean their eyes or get new eyes to be able to see the world through more indigenous eyes.
Yeah.
And so then from that, you get Stephanie, who studied with Martin for 12 years, who also just happened to have a passion for stories and a degree in literature that, did her no good at all and wasn't particularly interesting or meaningful. And now she runs this myth club where she is, hydrating those seeds again, where things are starting to burst. And of course, a lot of these stories travel. So even if your particular genetic line was just really ravaged, you can still go a little further afield, and maybe your neighbors have those stories, and maybe they have some memory of traditions. But also, even without all of that, you can start with some assumptions that a number of these stories originally really might have been rituals. They might have been seasonal rituals that are spoken of. And so then you can start to pay attention to the story. When in the year is this happening? So, for example, in the Frog Princess, the youngest brother, the king is old, wants to see his grandkids before he dies. So he says, "You got to get some wives," to his 3 sons. They go out and shoot arrows. One of them lands in a nobleman's yard, and the daughter gets it, and the other one in the merchant's yard. The last one lands in a swamp. And he goes, when he gets there, there's a frog with an arrow in her mouth saying, "You have to marry me." Just, "It's your destiny." And so he's bummed about this. But the frog, of course, ends up being a beautiful princess. And who ends up being a cuckoo later on in the story. So then you start to wonder about that. You say, wait, when do the frogs come out? Well, they come out in the spring. They are one of those who announce the spring. And when does the cuckoo leave? Well, they're a migratory bird. So you start to realize the timing of the story. And when you start to see numbers in it, you could start to wonder about are there constellations that relate to these things? And you can start to look up and learn about these constellations and what did my own people understand the stories of this constellation to be? Is it in songs? Here's the outrageous thing. So all of the colonization that happened in, what's now called North America, started in Europe. They perfected it there first,
Yep.
and a long time ago. And of course, we en masse are what they will become if this continues. There's no amount of melanin in your skin that keeps you from developing the particular psychoses that afflicted Europe. Anyways.
Yeah.
So that happened. Devastation. I mean, you've got the witch burnings, which, we're not as extreme, maybe as reported, but it's extreme enough. The numbers were high enough. You have the pogroms. You have the traveling people, the Roma, the Tinkers, the oppression of them. You got the Black Death, the small matter of the Black Death, wiping out a third of Europe overnight. You got the Crusades and the Charlemagne, all of this, an outright war on the pagan world that happens. Even with that, I'm saying any of you could pick one country of ancestry. And most of us, of course, in North America, we got a few to choose from. You could just pick one. And you could even pick a province in that country. And you would never get to the bottom of the cultural wealth that's still left. If you wanted to learn all the stories, all the songs, all the dances, the artwork, the astronomy, the archaeology, if you really want to dig into the cultural patrimony that's still there, you just couldn't do it on your own. So that's how much is still left. So there's immense grief of what's gone, but we mustn't let that have us lose sight of everything that's still there. And then if you are able to, you could read about other indigenous people where it's still more intact. You could go spend time with them, and be useful and learn from them. And of course, there's so many books written. And then you start to see parallels between your own ancestry, European ancestry, and, Aborigines in Australia or those in Africa or North America. There's a lot of kinship there, translated differently to the different places. But what it strikes me as in common is all of them were trying to be faithful to the land and to their memory of the actual things that happened. And that's the other thing. These stories have an outrageous memory of historical events from, the coming of the sudden cold to the flood, giants, these were remembering real things. This was not all just some inner psychic archetype, the flood that happens in our hearts. These were remembering real things. So anyways, there's a lot there still. There's a lot that's preserved. And God bless all the people, who started to do this and compare folk tales from different countries to see what the patterns are. Because there's a lot. Yeah. There's a lot of threads, and people have already done the research. So it's bad, but there's whatever tapestry there was is largely gone. But the threads are still there. We can still weave something with them. And we got some idea of what some of those images were, so might as well get to it.
Yeah. So how, for you anyway, or your understanding of the world, how does this kind of intersect with being more human and kind of that question? Because I feel like I've heard you kind of phrase that question yourself or pose that question yourself through your work. So I know that's something you're sort of interested in as well.
Well, this immediately takes us to this question of what does it mean? Yeah, what does it mean to be human? If we're going to be more human, what is the thing we're trying to be more of? And my understanding, speaking very cagily and generalizing dangerously, I think for most traditional people, the understanding was that being human was an accomplishment. That wasn't an inevitable something just because you're born.
Mm.
That you had to be initiated into it.
Mm.
That there was such a thing as being a good human being, and there was a chance of not being that, and so not really being human. Uh, there's such a misanthropy in the times that we live in. There's such a just self-hatred amongst humans of humans. There's a very deep and abiding sense that we are a cancer in the world and a virus in the world.
Yeah.
And it sounds like such a noble thing to say, but I would just caution people, when you're saying it, you're throwing all Indigenous people into it.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly empire is a kind of mania, but humanity is not necessarily so bad. You know, even you have it where it's leave no trace camping. No trace? Why is that? Well, because the only trace that we could leave as humans is a bad trace. That's what that says.
Mm-hmm.
How about this? You know, leave a human trace. What if you made a little altar of stones? What if you made a little mandala out of the art that you found? You know, what if you left something of beauty where you went? And so whatever, you know, what it means to be human, this is one of the immense questions. And this, to me, was the thrust of so many of the folktales. And so if you look at European folktales, I mean, some heritages still have the origins of humans and some don't. In the Celtic world, there's no first man, first woman stories that I know of, tragically. But, you know, there's enough. And I think what you're left with is the sense that humans were made to, well, the gods needed someone to say, wow, look at everything you made. You know, they needed somebody to walk around just being impressed by it all. So we came into the mix to walk around expressing this mix of grief and gratitude, to be just so in love with this world. And then as we began to, you know, distance ourselves from the wild and began to domesticate, as, you know, most cultures have to some extent, I think, then there just became a deal where to be human meant you had to feed nature. You had to feed the holy and the wild, that there was a marriage. And in that marriage, there were sacred vows and agreements, and those agreements had to be kept. And so then the function of culture is both, it tells you how to live a good life on a particular piece of land. It tells you how to be a good human being. And, you know, it helps feed you. It helps keep you healthy and strong so that you can be that kind of a person that can live in that way. Because humans are, you remember I was talking with this fellow about Ron Evans, Chippewa Cree Métis storyteller in Toronto at the library, and for a storytelling festival, and he said, you know, they have a character in some of their stories, different names, Whiskey Jack, Wisak Headsack, Wasaki Jack, but he's the first human. So just animals around, no other humans. And he's simultaneously this outrageously loving, generous human, and so selfish and stupid and defensive and all this. He's all of it. And Ron said, he said, you know, our understanding is that he's who we become without any elders and culture and teaching. And with elders and culture and teaching, we're a little less stupid and selfish, but not much. You know? And so what it means to be human, I suppose every culture really would have their own sense of it, so it's probably not proper to generalize. But from what I've seen, it does have something to do with Well, the mechanism is you have to fall in love with the place that you live.
Mm.
You have to fall in love with the holy in nature.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to learn how to care for her and feed her and take care of her. And those vows have to be renewed seasonally, annually, as a way to keep us on track. So that's my loose understanding of it.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I should also say the question of what is the role of humans. There's another question. Got to locate where are humans.
Mm.
Where we are is in the most dependent place. First you have the rocks, and then
Mm-hmm.
you get the soil, and then you get the grasses and the plants and all that feed the
Mm.
animals. And we as humans are dependent on all of them.
Mm.
And none of them depend on us.
Mm.
So that's our position. We're not at the apex of the grand design. We're the youngest one. We're the
Mm-hmm.
most recent addition to the mix.
Mm-hmm.
And so we are constantly on the receiving end, having done nothing to deserve it. Nothing in particular. We didn't earn this. This is not a merit system where humans
Mm-hmm.
got free oxygen from the trees and
Mm-hmm.
water to drink all the time.
Mm.
So that's just an important piece to remember in, what is our role? Well, probably enormous gratitude for
Mm-hmm.
all of that. And whether you want to think of it as debt or not, we've just been on the receiving end of a kind of largesse, which we can never repay. It's just, how could you do it? How can you repay the world? What could you possibly do in your lifetime
Mm-hmm.
that's going to repay the grace that you have received from the universe for no reason that you can discern? Is so baffling. But you try. Stephanie talks about, I think it's probably from Martine, that if we imagine it as debt, and I suppose there's upsides and downsides of that, but if we imagine it as debt, you you can't repay it,
Mm-hmm.
but you can address it
Mm-hmm.
and speak to it. You can acknowledge it, and I think that probably makes the world happy. Feel appreciated a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and if we don't want to think of it as debt, it's just there's a need to bring ourselves into alignment with the way it is.
Yeah.
And we're living so far out of alignment. We're
Yeah.
so untethered from anything. We're free, but we're, well, that's, as Stephen Jenkinson says, we are confused by freedom.
Yeah.
Because we have it, but so what? Now what? Did it
Mm-hmm.
work out the way we thought it would? No.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. I'm just feeling into this for a moment. I had something that popped to mind and then went right out again. Oh yeah. It's something I've been kind of sitting with you, like some of what you were just sharing was kind of prompting me. I was sitting with the sort of the interest and curiosity and inquiry around how Samhain is actually considered like the Celtic New Year, or that's what I've heard anyway. And, there was a part of me that when I first heard that was like, what a strange thing to end with death or to end with the beginning of death, not even at the peak of death, right? Or the peak of the rebirth or that moment at like winter solstice, that midwinter space of the turning point, right? It's like to be at the beginning of the end. And, one of the things that I felt like as I was kind of sitting with that was just this place of like, it got me curious about, was that some of our ancestors nod to this sense that the world had gone on long before they even arrived, and that there's something about the beginning is actually old age, like, or that our beginning, that our new year is actually coming at the old age of something else.
Oh, I think no
And
doubt,
yeah.
because I think there's a few ways one could look at it. One is in so many traditions, what is the universe? What does everything come out of? Nothing.
Hmm.
You know,
Hmm.
like the Nunga gap of Norse mythology, this great void, the yawning chasm. Things seem to come out of this. There's a big emptiness. So that's one. The darkness. Out of the darkness comes the light somehow.
Hmm.
Um, and second, all life comes from death. There is no
Hmm.
life except that other things died so that we could live today. I mean, that's what the soil
Yeah.
is everything that failed to live forever.
Yeah.
That's what we grow our food in. That's what our
Yeah.
food is made from. So, and it's not just the year. It was that in many cultures, the new day began at nighttime.
Mm. Mm.
When it gets dark, it's tomorrow.
Mm.
The new day has already begun. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's fascinating how just those tiny little shifts, how those things point us to curiosity that starts to question, wait, why do we in modern days seem to often assume it begins with life or it begins with birth or it begins with light or it begins with, and we have this fixation on youthfulness and we have this fixation on um on life and this fear of death and this, we have these focus on these things and um yeah, and so for me anyway, that was just one of those moments where it was like the stories or these wisdoms were kind of pointing me to something that's like, oh, what happens if I shift my perspective here? If I get curious about, this sort of semi unquestioned assumption that's lying somewhere within me.
Well, and it's interesting too, because one of the things when you start to look at these old stories is you realize that some of the beginnings that are being spoken about are not beginnings at all, but are
Mhm.
renovations. For
Mm.
example, in Genesis, that is not a story about the beginning of the world. That's the story about the renovation of the world.
Mm.
It wasn't go and just populate the world. The languaging is more in the realm of replenish, repopulate.
Mm.
Yeah. Because there were already people there. But so that story is the memory of a great cataclysm
Mm.
uh, involving the waters. And I mean, this goes back to the Old Testament. If you rewind that, and this is where you got to go as old as you can, I think.
Mhm.
But the oldest we have, but you got Sumer. That's in the Western society, anyways. I think there's older stories from indigenous people in other parts. But in terms of Western culture, you've got the Sumerian records, and which themselves begin with the appearance of these people, the Anuna, who the Babylonians turn into the Anunnaki, who then Zechariah Sitchin and the whole Gaia TV turns into the aliens.
Mhm.
But the earlier Sumerian is very clear in the depictions that these were people, tall, Caucasian bearded types in Viking helmets, arriving on boats. And from where? Um, from a flood, from a deluge that had happened.
Mm.
And, uh, and then if you go back, but in the Babylonian there's the story of um, where does this devil come from and this dragon and Tiamat come from? It's almost certainly the memory of a time when the oceans had overcome so much of the world and were so wild, and the deluge was so immense. And so the understanding was that sort of turmoil could only have been caused by a great snake in the water stirring up
Mm.
the waters. And this
Mm.
great serpent was associated with chaos. But then by the time it gets to the Old Testament and the Jewish scholars, it's become evil and bad.
Mm.
So
Mm.
chaos is now evil and the devil, and you get all of this. And I think it's Merodach who, in some, smites the serpent and the waters, and calms down, or soothes the waters. But so you could imagine that there was a great tumultuous time in the world, and eventually the deluge stopped. The sky stopped falling, and the sun came out, maybe for the first time in a long time, And so then this is, of course, there's God appearing and calming the waters because
Mm.
it's,
Mm.
um, but this gets all turned into the beginnings of everything when it may not have been the beginning at all. That may have been the memory of
Mm.
cataclysm, which was a new beginning,
Mhm.
but on
Mhm.
top of something else,
Mhm.
on top
Mhm.
of some older thing. And you ask the Mayans, who were like, and Aztecs, they're like, we didn't build these buildings, we found them.
Mm.
They were here before we got here.
Mhm.
Um, and that, man, that's a story from all around the world. The people show up, and there were already people there.
Yeah.
And they didn't even necessarily know the stories or histories of those people, or very little was left. So that's us always building
Mhm.
on the last thing.
Mm. Yeah, evolution written in.
Or the complete questioning of evolution. That's the other possibility.
Mhm. Mm.
Because you look at some of the indigenous stories of this question, what does it mean to be human? Well, where do humans come from? Did we evolve from monkeys?
Mm.
Could be. Um, and that's not what the indigenous stories say. That's absolutely not the history that they've received.
Mhm.
So, it makes it more mysterious.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe change would be better than evolution. Cycles.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a kind of spiraling cycle.
Yeah, because evolution does actually, especially how we conceive of that term, tends to imply a linearity that most of these stories don't actually have, and most of these
Yeah.
conceptions of the world don't actually have.
And it's
Although there is a certain trajectory of the ones who came before, the ones who will come after, there is a certain sense of like standing on the shoulders, but still within this greater framework of that son who's birthed every day and then becomes old and dies every day, the stories of the bone woman in the cave singing over the bones, all of these stories of kind of that regeneration.
if you notice what your hands were doing as you're talking, you're moving in circles
Yeah.
and spirals and this, which is not what empire does.
Right.
Empire's understanding of evolution is that humanity all around the world has been evolving to it, the
Mhm.
pinnacle. Well, man, first of all of nature was just waiting to be human and just didn't
Yeah.
get a chance. Tough luck. And then
Yeah.
all humans have just been evolving to be the United States of America.
Right. Yeah.
Great Britain. And not every, too bad. Hey, maybe next lifetime you get a chance, reincarnation, you get lucky. You could be one of us. I mean, Wade Davis has that line where he says, other cultures are not failed attempts at being us. And it
Yeah.
strikes me that
Mm.
evolution, as it, I'm genuinely not convinced about the story of evolution for humans. But for most of the natural world, I think it's clear. But what you see is, whereas Empire's version of evolution is narrower and narrower towards a
Yeah.
very fixed point. Evolution seems to be a kind of spreading
Yeah.
out more and more diversity. Empire's understanding of evolution is less diversity.
Yes.
Until
Yeah.
we all speak the same language, it's a one world government, and we got
Mm-hmm.
a World Health Organization for everybody, and in fact, we got a global police force, and isn't it great? We got a global digital currency, and we got one ID that you can use, and it's just a little too Lord of the Rings Sauron-esque
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the elimination of diversity.
Yeah. Well, because that's the only way you can, the more same everybody is, the easier it is to control or, govern in some way, as opposed to, it's much more complicated and complex and tension filled to healthy tension filled as well as potentially unhealthy tension filled to have a world where, yeah, diversity is actually um is the
Well,
way.
yeah, and this is one of the oldest tensions, I think, in humans, is this chaos and order.
Mm-hmm.
And how do those two relate to each other? And
Mm-hmm.
when do you need more chaos and when do you need more order? And it becomes very seductive, I think, to, well, if you're on the right, to just, well, it's all order, order, order. And that's what is more structure. Or if you're one of the terrified, psychopathic elites who just needs everything, technocrats who need a fucking number on everything and a barcode on everything to just finally feel in control so they can relax. On one side, but then on the other side, no, there should be no order, no structure at all. It's just all wild, chaos, and that's it. And I think every culture ongoingly wrestles with the tension between those, but institutionalizes it too. So you have the tricksters, you have the clowns, the jesters, the court jesters who play this role of making sure things don't get too stagnant, because at its extreme, when you get order, that leads to a kind of hierarchy that's very toxic. Not that all hierarchy, but so it becomes so structured, and you get nepotism and you get corruption at the very top, and that does have to be broken down from time to time. But if it's just wild and crazy, that's real hard on humans. We're not good at just no patterns at all. That's traumatic for us. So, but the willingness of people to sit together and in a spirit of goodwill wonder about those things. What's needed right now? Chaos or order? And how? And I think that's one of the things that makes culture, is the willingness to grapple with those things in real time.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm aware of our time and sort of starting to kind of wrap this. And this feels like there are a couple moments here where it could kind of make a little bit of an awkward segue, but maybe a smooth one towards, like, I guess if you want to share some of what you've got kind of going on in your business, and if there are any final thoughts you kind of want to feel called to kind of, bring together from the conversation we've had. But yeah, kind of this question too, then, of also like I guess I'm sort of, where is some of this viewpoint that we've been talking about maybe informing, perhaps some of the segue is, where is some of this viewpoint informing your views on marketing and some of that other work that you do? Because I think there's something really unique to you in how you bridge this culture and the storytelling and the marketing and the, and all of that. Or you could also ignore that question and just go wherever you want to go with it.
Well, you did a better segue than I think I could have mustered myself. So thank you for saving me the pain of trying that. Well, here's how it strikes me: is when we were in the UK there, and there's all those old buildings that would just make us green with envy. And you got those old stone archways too, which are just magic, and the pillars on the side, you get to stack of it's not so hard. I could do that. But then you get the arch part, which I just stare at sometimes, and it just makes no sense. I'm like, how did you balance everything along? How did you fit it to? It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I know there's a mechanic. I don't want to know it. I don't want anyone to tell me, because it's just too beautiful. But you get the keystone, yeah? So that keystone that's where the two pieces meet. And I would consider that like the market. That's the marketplace. And when I say market, I'm thinking a farmer's market. I'm thinking a craft show. I'm thinking the village square where everyone gets together. And the marketplace is basically where people are getting together and saying, hey, here's what I've been up to since I saw you last. On display. What they've brought. And so that's the market. But then those two pillars are held up by something. They got their foundation stones on either side. And on one side you have sustenance, and then on the other side you have relationship, basically. And these are two very important things for humans to grapple with. How do we sustain ourselves, feed ourselves in every way that could be meant? But also, how do we keep goodwill as we do it? How do we sustain relationships and reciprocity with, in every way, and with every relationship that could be meant, not just human, but also including human. So in other words, we have to do things that work, that are functional. That's the sustenance part. It has to do the thing. If you make a tool, that tool has to work. But it also has to feel good to everybody involved, ideally. So what I see is so many people in the modern world feel torn between ethics and effectiveness. Ethics being the relationship and goodwill side, and effectiveness being the sustenance side. And they feel like I either have to market myself in a way that it's effective, but I can't sleep at night. My conscience is constantly assailed by what I'm doing to other people. Or I have to market in a way that is not effective at all, but I can sleep beautifully because I know I'm not one of those easy, slimy marketing people. But it's a false choice. That's my main point, is that you don't have to choose. That stone archway does meet somewhere, and it meets in the market. And we need both sides for that archway to stay standing. If you remove one of those foundation stones, the entire thing crumbles. So where do those two things meet? Right, they meet in the keystone. But that they meet at all, that is our outrageous good fortune as humans. That's the setup. Is that the weaving, the braiding of ethics and effectiveness together, of sustenance or goodwill, is actually how it works. That really is the approach in the long term. And the challenge is, so much of the marketing work that I grew up with when I was 18 and I started training is deeply coercive. And what does it mean to be human? Well, I think we're on the receiving end of so much of this. And we just know when somebody's treating us in a humane way and when they're not. And we can feel it. And this is why I think so many traditional cultures are just big on dignity and preserving the dignity of people. There's something in our soul that really rankles against it. So if as we are coerced constantly in modern society, from our parents to education systems, to the jobs that we're in, the political systems, the media, which is nothing but a constant button-pushing coercion machine. And we just learn that that's the way that we treat each other. But then if everybody walks around coercing everybody and using people, well, one of the main functions of empire and civilization is that it converts living things into dead things. It turns mountaintops into pop cans and trees into paper and people into numbers. And that's what modern marketing is doing, is turning people into things. That's objectifying people. That's the fundament of that sliminess, is objectification. And just as the fundament of creepiness is veiled intention. You're hiding your intention. So then we're being objectified and we're feeling scared all the time, always on guard, that something is lurking. And I don't think that contributes to us being more human. I think it makes us scared. I think it shuts us down. It closes our hearts down. But there's a way that we can share our work that is as beautiful as the work. There's a way that we can market that actually affirms other people's humanity instead of denigrating it, that has them leaving more in touch with themselves instead of less, that connects them with their conscience rather than disconnects them one more time. Marketing can be trauma informed. It can be respectful. It can be kind. It can be dignified and dignifying. And so to me, that's the connection. Is I think all of our ancestors would understand that way of relating. They might not have had a market exactly, but they would understand the principles at work. In my work, I talk about there's this kind of pyramid of things. And the very first thing is ethics. And then we look at niching, and we look at articulating our point of view. And then there's the business model thing. And then there's this hub marketing piece. But if I were to translate that into traditional values that my own ancestors would immediately get, the ethics piece really comes down to respect. Do you respect the people you're engaging with? The niche piece comes down to the value of humility. Are you willing to admit that you can't help everybody? That are you willing to feel some grief that there are people you wish you could help and you just can't, and you're not the best person, and you can't do everything and be everything to everybody? There's a lot of humble pie in that, which is not easy for humans. And then the point of view piece, well, this is the value of wisdom. Humans have always valued wisdom and the ability to see patterns. And then the business model piece is the traditional value of craft, making things that function but are also beautiful. And then hub marketing, well, this is the value of relationship. This is the value of reciprocity. And how do we do things in partnership instead of alone all the time? So if you put this together, this respect and humility and wisdom and craft and this value of reciprocity, you get a good human being. So I think we can market in ways that make us better human beings and also ennoble the other human beings we're in contact with.
Yeah. I was reading something, John, I've been reading some John O'Donohue, and he was speaking about sort of, and I actually did a podcast episode, a solo one, on kind of some of my musings around this not that long ago. But yeah, this idea of like, because I think sometimes too, we fall into sort of this false thing of that, like it's life or death, right? And he was talking about, and it's, opposing forces, and that balance is actually like we need opposing forces always in the universe and always at play, and that fluctuation. And so this sense of absence and presence are just actually necessary opposing forces. But then the real trouble is actually vacancy, And so I was thinking about that when you were sort of speaking too of kind of bringing it back to sort of that story you told from the indigenous, the First Nations storyteller that you were speaking to, is talking about the first human, the first man, and kind of the selfishness and the generosity and sort of that, like, that internal versus external, that tension that we sort of have, but that, when we're out of alignment, we become vacant, and the things we create become vacant. And so, empire, for me, empire almost feels like it's more about vacancy actually than even about death, because death is like part of that cycle, but it's like, we have to almost become vacant within ourselves and in our relationships in order to perpetuate these non-dignifying and kinds of things. And
if we become vacant in ourselves, one of the things that vacates the world is human beings. And I submit that there's a beautiful function for human beings. It's not that the rest of the world depends on us, but we have something unique and beautiful to contribute to the situation. And it's important that we do. Martin Prel had a beautiful line. He said, being beautiful on the way to the answer is the answer. So whether we're looking at ancestry, or whether we're looking at, marketing a business, or whatever the thing that we do is, I think that's as good a lodestone and, pole star as we're likely to find. Proceeding beautifully on the way to the answer. That is the answer.
Yeah. Yeah. The ends, the ends don't justify the means, or, within my sort of approach of energy work, it's like the how we do something becomes what we do, because, the how we do it is the actual energy of it. And so we can't, if the how is icky, then the thing itself will be icky. If the how includes trauma, then we cannot possibly be helping people heal, and that's one of the things I see all the time in the wellness world, it's just kind of this, like, the how of things is re-traumatizing. But everybody's promising that they're helping people heal. And I'm like, it seems unlikely with that methodology. You know? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Is there any last piece, anything else you want to share about kind of what you have coming up in your business or where people can find you? I'll have the link to your Substack in the show notes. And you mentioned your marketingforhippies.com. You mentioned your website at the beginning, and I'll put that in the show notes too. Is there anything else you want to share or you feel like you want to say to wrap and kind of bring us in?
No, I think that's it. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for being here. And yeah, I'll have to connect with you about getting Stephanie's about making connection with Stephanie. I'd love to have her. So, and possibly join her myth club. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. And yeah, so we'll just take a couple moments as we're kind of closing to just take a few deep breaths in and out again and just let the conversation kind of settle into our hearts, into our bones, into our cells. And yeah, we'll kind of just let ourselves be be human. And we'll thank the fire for holding us, thank the land for holding us. And know that it's always here for next time. So thank you so much once again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time around the fire. Hi, Kate here again. Thank you for gathering with us. Whether you've been here a while or found your way here thanks to today's guest, it means so much to me and the world I dream of to have you here. I hope you'll tune in for more of our conversations. We humans seem to be at a profound threshold and facing questions of deep impact for the future and the world. We need our full hearts and humanity as we sow seeds of change in these times of joy and heartbreak. I count myself lucky to be here now, around this virtual village fire, weaving our stories into a medicine with humans like you. As a community medicine space, this podcast is relational. It weaves webs of connection and mutual respect and care across time and space. If you appreciate and support the future we're seeding here, you can support the weaving of this web in a few ways. 1, share episodes with friends and family or online with your community. It also helps the podcast immensely if you like, rate, subscribe to, or follow the podcast where you watch or listen, so you get notified when new episodes drop and new listeners find us as they search. 2, join us on Patreon. Doing so supports conversations like the one you just heard and allows you access to live community gatherings and medicine circles and more as we continue to grow. It also helps me keep the space advertisement-free so the conversations stay intact as they are. If you have questions, suggestions, connections, or would like to find out more about working with me, you can find me online at www.wildsacredjourney.com, on Instagram at wildsacredjourney_KP, or email me, kate@wildsacredjourney.com. Until next time, from my heart to yours, I release today's fire with a prayer for our individual and collective wholeness, connection, and joy. May it be so.